When I look across the suburban model that was launched post-World War II, that we all are familiar with, defined by its great schools, open spaces, local towns and villages, I think it's being challenged as never before. I think single-family homes are flat in terms of how their values go. Suburban, and they've been flat for 8 years, and I know there's some home builders in the audience here today. The suburban office market is suffering from high vacancies and the lowest level of activity in 20 years. And retail, people would say, maybe it's overbuilt in this market, and we're specifically going to talk about Westchester and Fairfield, and maybe residential apartments are heading in the same direction. So, at the same time, cities such as New York, Boston, Brooklyn are booming and attracting more and more people up the two age groups we just talked about. So the challenge for us, for all of us on this table today, and the way we should frame this is how do we do development to capture, retain baby boomers who came out to the suburbs, right, because of raising their families and all the attributes that we know about. And the suburbs, as we talk about today, are urban suburbs as well. White Plains I consider an urban suburb. New Rochelle, an urban suburb. Stanford, okay. Yonkers. How do we attract those baby boomers? How do we also attract the millennials? Are we going to sit and wait for the tide to change where millennials want to come out to the suburbs, or are we going to get aggressive and reinvent our suburban markets? And that's really the focus of how we're going to do the panel and what we want to think about today. I think the suburban model, my own opinion, my own thesis, it's broken. And I don't see the planning happening in and around us that's really being aggressive to compete with that demographic group to help us get sustainable growth in these markets.
So I think that the best way to describe New Rochelle is that we're a village trapped in the body of a city. We desperately want to be a village. We want to behave like a village, but we're not. We have the good, bad, and the ugly of a city. And embracing that is our biggest challenge. And we did a really extensive outreach to folks in New Rochelle and outside of New Rochelle, all the way to Brooklyn, New Jersey, to find out how people felt about New Rochelle. Folks within New Rochelle were very, very negative about the city. Folks outside of our city were very positive. So it's how is it that we actually begin our branding within our own boundaries so that we can then embrace our growth? Because the infrastructure is there. The location is there. It's just a willingness to actually grow. Change is good as long as nothing changes. So we just need to go past that to get it.
To me, some of the great attributes that Fairfield has, as well as Westchester, is the school systems that we have, the wealth that we have, and the human capital that we have. And, you know, it is still one of the tops nationally, this area. But what we really struggle with is that we are a mature market. We are a mature market in the home stock that we have, the office buildings that we have, as well as Sal pointed out, some of the concepts of that suburban office park that worked very well for the 70s and the 80s. Whereas now it seems to be more the live, work, play model, and the need to have easy access to transportation and cost-efficient housing, where you're not running into a situation where you're a first-time home buyer, where you're going to spend $750,000 and that's for a fixer-up. I think also the reality of the shakeout with the capital markets in 2007, 2008 is folks that have had to move on to different jobs are not necessarily replacing their salaries where they were. And you have to take those types of things into account. So to me, the key going forward is being able to meet not only what the millennials are looking for, but the baby boomers as well. And there's a lot of them that are looking to downsize, but have a smaller place in the area that they raise their families and shed themselves of the larger homes. The big question mark, though, is who's going to be buying the larger homes.
I was talking to, I actually, because we were doing this presentation, I actually sat with some millennials, and I have actually some kids that are. that age. And I said, what do you want? And they said, we want walkability. We want to be able to not necessarily have a car. We want to be able to have transit-oriented development. We want to be able to stop and work at a local level, and we're not so worried about climbing up the corporate ladder, which I found very interesting. And as far as our 51 to 69, which I'm one of, people are selling their homes, but they're not buying. They might buy a smaller house, but they're moving into apartments. So what we find that's happening in Austin right now is we have a tremendous amount of apartments being built, which is fine, but of course we have our environmentalists there, we have a stress on our water supply, we have a stress on our sewer lines, we have, not necessarily if we can keep it in the older groups, we don't have such a stress on our schools, but in our particular instance, our schools are overfilled. We don't have the luxury of not having enough children in our school. We're in the middle of we hope to be and I've been in government for 10 years, so it's been going on for 10 years, and I'm not seeing it move at the pace we'd like to see it, but like a revitalization of our community. We have very old buildings downtown, historical buildings. We have a beautiful waterfront. We have a large building going on down there, 188 units. But what we don't have is we don't have something we don't have a village, or as you said before, someplace for entertainment. We need to brand ourselves better. We have great things happening in the community. We do not brand ourselves, and what we do more than anything is we don't have places. We have little pockets of good restaurant here, good restaurant there, but nothing that shows a whole community where you can walk around, like in Cold Springs, even Tarrytown, Sleepy Hollow. So we're lacking in that, and that's a vision thing. That I believe is we're just not pursuing that enough. So. And we have office parks that are empty, which is we need to repurpose our office parks at this point.
So again, the downtown is critical. To preserve it, to reanimate it is something that municipalities really have to get involved with, including merchant and business improvement groups, because of the fabric of the downtown. It's not something you're going to interest a developer in, but if you do it, you'll attract the developers you want. And similarly, in New Rochelle, when I started, it was a Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 community. On the weekends, there were some nasty nightclubs that took over the downtown. It was not an area that people wanted to be in, especially live in. We now have a 24/7. We have a plethora of wonderful restaurants, and we've had some development pre-2008. And one of the reasons that Louise is now able to work with a master developer is because what's next door to development sites is a viable, historic, walkable, pedestrian-oriented downtown, which is what the kids want. I live in New York City in an apartment building, and we refer to it as NARCs, naturally occurring retirement communities. And that's what downtown should be looking to, both for the young people, but for the older people, because they are walkable, they generally are near transportation, and they have the basic services and entertainment that we all want.
When you look at the success that we're talking about, some of the key ingredients are education, higher education. So if I even looked at Burlington, Vermont, it is going through a huge revitalization because the University of Vermont's there and they're playing off of that. Their health center, their attractiveness to startup companies, young people, etc. Okay, Stanford, in my opinion, and I'm going to take 2 minutes on Stanford, should have moved the MBA program from UConn, not to Hartford, where no MBA student wants to be, but to Stanford, and competed head-on with Cornell, and gone after all the schools in New York to attract students to the UConn graduate program right in the city of Stanford. They have a facility there, but they've never really capitalized on it. They never focused on the pedestrian pathway between the south end, where they put Fairway all by itself and then built apartments around it, to how a pedestrian would cross under 95 in the railroad, which are very intimidating crossings. Now we have 25 to 50 jitneys running around the city of Stanford, okay? They have no entertainment concept built into that development plan. I don't know why I have to go to Mohegan Sun to hear Billy Joel play, when there should be a 10,000-seat arena in Stamford, that all those cars go by every day and say, Billy Joel's gonna be here on the 6th, I'm going, and the kids are going, everybody, I have to go to Mohegan Sun, and I don't understand why we don't have a AAA ball team, okay? So I'm gonna throw some ideas out there. If there was a whole South End that could have been redeveloped, and none of this happened. Apartments came up, office buildings came up, and they're looking for a hotel. And by the way, fortunately, we stopped the debacle of moving Bridgewater down to, on the other side of the hurricane wall for their, brand new $100 million state subsidized new building. They're staying in Westport, all right? So we can go into that. So, New Rochelle, you have a huge project on the books. You have 3 wonderful colleges in that city, okay, which is impressive. How do you inject into the planning, is there going to be a museum? Is there going to be some form of entertainment? Is there going to be art wrapped into this development? And I don't want just the little things, I want the big picture. How are you going to get that in? I know you have this crowdsourcing concept with this firm. Give us a little bit of how does that get injected into your development? How are you going to work on transportation? Stanford should have maybe taken a shot at a surface rail, for example. How exciting would that have been to have a loop on a surface? Okay, so you get my point.
Before I talk about the colleges specifically, I just want to say that the way that we deal with them, we just ignore them.
Yeah. I got that, right?
That's what we've been doing consistently. But I-95 is actually a huge issue for us because I-95 has completely severed New Rochelle in two. And for those of you who might not know history in New Rochelle, but the pre-baby boomers, back in the 30s, New Rochelle was the 3rd largest per capita income in the country, which is rather bizarre. And that's why, we're the first suburb, and that's why you see these beautiful homes and such a wonderful history in New Rochelle. When you speak to folks that have been there for generations, there's this huge resentment of what New Rochelle was and no longer is. But if you just, fast forward a little bit and now go to the 70s, and as we are a victim of the urban renewal of the 70s where they just destroyed our downtown and we became this vast desert around the train station, if you fast forward from that point on, we've come a long way. And New Rochelle now has a density downtown. And going back to what Sue was saying earlier, I don't know how many people is enough. And that's a question that we ask all the time. We built, with the 2 Avalon buildings and the Trump building, about 1,500 new residential units downtown. And people say, well, nothing happened. Well, 1,500 units a town does not make. And that is a big issue, and because there's huge resentment with New Rochelle-ians, because we are perceived as having given the town away in terms of benefits and incentives and all that, in order to have those folks. So the first thing that we need to do, and the way that we are approaching things differently now, after a number of failed attempts in developing sites downtown, because to be honest with you, we have wonderful sites. They're 2 blocks away from the train station, and why hasn't it happened? And it has been, it's been a result of a lot of pushback from the community whenever we bring those developments forward. So what we decided to do was take a step back and stop developing on a site-by-site basis. And that's when we reached out and really we asked for a partner out there in the developing community to come to New Rochelle and look at New Rochelle with us. No preconceived ideas. We honestly didn't know what we were looking for. We know that what we have is not what we want. And we want to be that catalyst that's going to attract those very groups, the millennials and the baby boomers, to come to our city like everybody else is doing. And we want to win. I'm slightly competitive, so we want to be there, at the edge, leading, the curve. So when we did, after going to a competition, have RDRXR come to New Rochelle, that's a partnership between Renaissance Downtowns and RXR Realty, Scott Redwood. We're very happy that Scott was there because that means that money is in the pocket and things are going to happen. But RD, Renaissance Downtowns, was a vital piece of what we're doing. What they actually convinced us that it was the right thing to do was to go really deep into what we call crowdsourced placemaking, CSPM, which is a very, very sophisticated process of reaching out to the community and having them define what the project is. Because we know that if we just build housing, even if it's just phase one, we're going to fail. We are not going to succeed if we don't build the environment where the millennials and the baby boomers are going to thrive. They understand that. By they, I mean RXR Realty and Renaissance Downtowns. They know that they can't just put shovel in the ground for a high-rise building with 200, 300 units. It's not going to resolve the problem because they're going to keep on doing what they're doing today, which is hopping the train and going to the city to go shopping. And then they come back to the city. The only thing they're doing now in New Rochelle is eating because of the restaurants, because of the vitality that Ralph has been developing out of downtown. So what we're doing is a multi-pronged approach. We are working on creating the urban environment that these folks want. We're creating the funkiness that they're looking for. I'm a firm believer that New Rochelle is a city with a soul, and it's the very soul that I'm trying to go deeper into. We're trying to preserve some of the historic buildings, but I want to be cutting edge. I want really, cutting edge architecture. We want to be, leading the charge in terms of attracting the folks that are now moving to the, to the High Line in Manhattan, but don't want to pay those prices. So come to New Rochelle, and we're going to be able to, provide the same services. Maybe not today, but 5 years from now, 10 years from now, it's going to be very different. So through the crowdsourced placemaking process, folks are actually telling us what they want in New Rochelle in order to move to New Rochelle, in order to make it into a vibrant city. The agreement that we have with RDRXR is that if the idea is economically viable, and if it has enough support from the community, so let's say we want an opera house, and 200 people like the opera house in this crowdsourced placemaking process, RDRXR has the obligation to do a market analysis and a feasibility study. And if it shows that an opera house could be built and it's viable, they have an obligation to build the opera house in our downtown as part of our agreement. So it's a way that the community is participating to create the very community they want to stay in, that they want the kids to move into. And it is a long process. It's not an easy process. But what I've been seeing since we started this, which was, we made the announcement in December, is that a lot of the naysayers, the folks that managed to kill a lot of our projects, have actually come around. And they've become what we call the ambassadors. And they actually are promoting their ideas. And they're helping us make their ideas into a reality. And by doing that, they're making the global vision a reality.